in the pursuit of truth and common sense in an unbelievable world. You're listening to the Right Mind podcast with your host, Todd Showalter.
Hello, everybody. I'm Todd Showalter, and this is Right Mind. Today, my guest is author, novelist, Howard Kaplan. You may have known some of his earlier works. He had a book called The Damascus Cover that was made into a film with John Hurt, and he's got a new book coming out now. It's called The Syrian Sunset, I believe. How you doing? What's going on, Howard?
Doing well. Thank you.
Did I get that right? Is it The Syrian Sunset?
That's exactly it. The idea was things aren't going well in Syria, so it's kind of a sunset rather than a sunrise.
Gotcha. Well, it certainly is not going too well in Syria. How did you get involved? Because you've got a lot of background. I mean, you go back, we're going to talk about this in a little bit. I mean, you were even held prisoner in the USSR at one point when you were 21 years old. Tell us how'd you get into this and just what's your background? What is it?
Well, I was traveling with a friend when I was in college. I'm from California.
Okay.
And we decided to go to the Arab countries to see what it was like. So we went to Lebanon, and then fluky things happened. There was an American from UC Santa Barbara studying there, and he had a Syrian roommate. And his roommate said, it's only 50 miles to Damascus from Beirut, and we have something called a shared taxi. You just buy your seat on the taxi, and at the border, they'll give you a visa. It's not like this new COVID world where it's hard to get visas. Mm-hmm. They just filled my passport with all kinds of stamps. We got to Damascus, and we went to this great Umayyad mosque, which is a fabulous building built in the 7th century with columns left over from the Romans. And then we went to some other areas of Damascus, and my friend noticed we were being followed.
Okay.
So Syria seemed a little bit of a dangerous place. So we went right back to the main square, got a shared taxi back to Beirut and Lebanon. But it whetted my appetite to learn more. The day we were there, it was a fabulous country. It turns out that Damascus is the oldest continuously inhabited city on the planet, because it was on the trade routes from China to the Mediterranean. And what Damascus is really is an oasis. Mm-hmm. There's an underground river that goes from Lebanon, then it's desert for 50 miles. The river comes up, branches into 7 streams, and it's incredibly lush. They're some of the biggest apricot exporters in the world. They make this apricot juice, which I use paste in this new novel, The Syrian Sunset, because they export it all over the Arab world after the holiday of Ramadan. And it's very famous. So it's this lush orchards and full of blossoms and roaring rivers. So I thought, boy, I want to learn more about this.
Oh, okay. Now, what year was this?
This was actually 1971.
Okay, and you say you were being followed. Who was exactly following you?
I don't know. I never saw it. My friend said when we were at the Great Mosque, he saw someone kind of looking at us, nothing in particular. But then we went someplace else, 30 minutes away, and he saw the same guy.
Okay, all right.
And we thought, you know what? Let's get out of here and not find out too much more.
Right, but so that pretty much whet your appetite to take things further. So when you did this, I mean, obviously things went further, and you ended up writing a book. What was the time span between when you first did this and you decided, hey, I'm going to write a book about this?
Well, the first book, which you mentioned, one that was filmed, was called The Damascus Cover. Mm-hmm. It actually was published in 1977. It was a fairly successful book. It was on the LA Times bestseller list.
Right.
And then the way things happened, it got filmed 40 years later.
Okay. And yet you had a good actor. Right.
John Hurt and Jonathan Rhys-Meyers also,
okay,
who is a very known Irish actor. And I was very fortunate. And I met then a member of British Parliament. His name was Brooks Newmark, who had been advocating that the West help the Syrian people who are being slaughtered by the current government. He failed in that effect. He happened to be in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. We were going for a walk, and he said to me, Howard, it's time to go back to Syria. Now, he didn't mean get on a plane. He meant do a new novel about the current civil war and how Putin ran amok in Syria and how the West, Obama and James Cameron, let him bomb everybody.
James Cameron? Are you talking the same James Cameron?
No, David Cameron. I'm sorry.
David Cameron. Okay, I was going to say, how did he get involved?
The Prime Minister of Great Britain. Even I was confused.
Okay.
They backed down.
They
wanted to bomb the helicopter bases where the people were being killed by barrel bombs, and they ended up backing down. And in the end, Assad killed 500,000 people.
Okay. Now, you said in some of the notes I went over earlier, you said this was in 2012, I believe. You said Obama was given an opportunity to actually step in and possibly do something, and that just didn't happen. And you think, and that's what, as a result, things escalated. And there are a lot of similarities, you're saying, between what Putin did there and what's going on now in the Ukraine, correct?
Right, exactly. My thesis of the novel, which is a historical novel, the Syrian Sunset, is that if we would have gotten tough with Putin in Syria, he might have thought twice about going into Ukraine.
Okay.
Because we backed down in Syria, and he had a small naval base already. And after we backed down, meaning the Germans, the Americans, and the British, he built a huge naval base, a huge airfield and military base, and he used those planes, and he claimed that he was going to kill ISIS, but the planes really took off and bombed the Free Syrian Army.
Wow, okay.
So we gave him free reign, and Assad is still in power. And if you were Putin and you said, hey, the West are kind of weak.
Right.
I just go do what I want.
And now we've got the same kind of scenario going, don't we? I mean, so now he's basically doing the same type of thing in the Ukraine. Now, as a result of all this, I mean, that's some serious subject matter we're dealing with. That you, as a result, you decided to do a novel, which is fiction, obviously. How did it tell me? I mean, do you have a central character? Tell me a little bit about the book itself.
Well, the novel's been out since the end of November of last year.
Okay.
And one of the things that interested me, because it's got about 44 customer reviews on Amazon, so 4.7 out of 5. But one of the things that people like is the novel's funny.
It's funny.
It's funny in a lot of places. And that tends to offset the passages about the brutality of the regime. For example, I have a Russian oligarch who's a secondary character.
Okay.
And I know some people in Moscow who helped me, and they said one of the things going on in Moscow is they're turning these old movie theaters into huge entertainment centers. By entertainment center, I mean not just movies and kids games, but ice skating rink, beauty parlors. They do a couple of square blocks.
Just like a theme park almost.
Yes, and they have room there. It's a huge country. So this oligarch is turning these places into theme centers, and he's a huge fan of American movies, and he's particularly a fan of Tom Hanks. But he's troubled, if you remember in Castaway, that famous film where he crashes and ends up on an island.
Absolutely, yeah.
The movie begins with Tom Hanks in Moscow working for FedEx. So the character in my novel says, I do not believe the great Tom Hanks would work for FedEx. I believe that he would Tom Hanks would save Private Ryan, go into World War II, but he would not work. And so there's a running gag through the whole film about this Russian oligarch and Tom Hanks. And so now some movie people want to show the book to Tom Hanks to see if he's interested in doing it.
Really? Okay. Well, I mean,
fun, you know.
Well, you're okay. You're in LA, right?
I'm in the right place. Yes.
Okay. I was going to say, so, I mean, is that part of your, routine? I mean, do you shop a lot of your books, to the studios and things like that? I mean, I take it you have a literary agent or something. You just don't walk in the door.
But sometimes things you can do personally. So who did I meet on Facebook? Just odd experiences. I met a Navy SEAL who is very big in Hollywood in terms of working with all the studios and all the streaming people in authenticating everything that has to do with terrorism and Navy and SEAL operations. And by chance, he worked with Tom Hanks on Captain Phillips.
Really?
That movie, where he was caught as a Somali pirate, it's actually back on HBO.
Right. Sure.
So he said he'll try to talk to Tom Hanks for me.
Well, hey, that's a nice,
we'll try, so sometimes those kind of little oddball personal connections work better than agents.
Oh, no, that's true too. I mean, just coincidental things like that. I mean, I've had a few myself, so I know what you mean. So at this point, tell me a little bit about, let's go back a little bit to your first book that was turned into a movie. Okay, now that had to be, how long had you been an author at this point? Were you relatively new?
I started writing in my early 20s.
Okay, all right.
The first book was published when I was 26.
Okay, you're 26. And so what? And so this book, it got to be very popular, you said. And did they approach you and say, hey, Howard, we want to make a movie out of this?
No, it was exactly the opposite.
You approached them. You met them on Facebook back in the 70s, right?
Right. You're talking about in the 70s now, right?
Right.
I had a big agent, and they had big Hollywood agents.
Okay.
They sent it to all the studios and producers. At that time, people didn't want to do Middle East pictures. And I had this producer who called me up. He was a pretty big producer, actually. And he said, I don't want to do your story, but I like the writing so much and the story so much. I want you to come and work for me.
Really? Who is this? Was this somebody we would know?
I remember his name.
Okay.
He worked for Lionsgate. That's all I remember. It was really because what happened, I was a little too cocky. I thought, hey, I just had a book that was a pretty big hit. I'm going to write another book. I'm not going to go work for movies. So that was a big mistake.
Well, I mean, you did. I mean, as a result of that, I mean, the movie was made, though. So, yes. I mean, who ended up making it? If you mind, it
ended up being made also in the same kind of fluky way.
Okay.
The director was looking to do a film about the Middle East, and he mentioned it to a friend of his, and she said, "I have this old book on my shelf. I'd like you to look at it because I think it's really timely still." She took the Damascus cover down, gave it to him. He read it. He called me up and said, I want to meet you at Pete's Coffee and do a deal. I want to make a movie out of your book.
Wow. Okay.
And he did.
That's incredible. And you got, like I say, John Hurt was in it. So, I mean, yeah, some decent actors. I mean, so I think just with that luck alone, I mean, who knows? Maybe Tom Hanks will get on board.
It's the same kind of thing, One of the things I learned, I went to the shoot. They shot the film in Morocco in Casablanca. Mm-hmm. And that novel, the Damascus cover, has a big twist ending. So nobody ever figured out the twist in advance. So it's kind of a big thriller in that sense. Mm-hmm. Where the Syrian Sunset, all the reviews think it's my best book. It's a little deeper, a little more serious, a little better characters, a little less concerned about the action and more concerned about the seriousness of history and current events. And as I said, it's funny. So a lot of times, so you ask about Tom Hurt, how do they do this? Films are not shot in the order of the story. Mm-hmm. They're shot in the order that makes sense to make it the easiest and cheapest production. Meaning if you've got an actor like John Hurt, he's a secondary character, so he's in, let's say, 6 scenes.
Right.
6 major scenes. They bring him in. They don't have to pay him his big money. They pay him a daily rate, and he shoots the scenes 5 days in a row.
Right. Okay.
And he's gone. So even a guy like Tom Hanks, these people do what they want to do. They're so big. They don't need the money. They don't need the prestige. they do what appeals to them. So for John Hurt, he liked the character. It reminded him of a character he played in Tinker Tailor's Soldier Spy. And he came into Morocco for a week, and he told the director, on Friday, I'm leaving at 5:00, so you better be done with me. You know, he has the clout, you know.
And that's how it works.
And that's how it worked.
Pretty exciting stuff. Now, a lot of your stuff, obviously, I guess almost all of your stuff, I should say, has a historical background to it. I assume that a lot of research has to go into your books. I mean, what is your process when you're taking on a book? I mean, do you go live in the place that you're going to be writing about? Do you do a lot of studying?
Ideally like to go to the place.
All right. Okay.
But the world, I just did an article about this for a mystery magazine. The world has changed since the time I wrote the Damascus cover to the time I wrote the Syrian Sunset. The Damascus cover was pre-computers. So you couldn't do Google Images.
Right. Yeah.
Now, for example, so I try to go to as many places, but you can't go to everywhere. So you have to find books. Often British journalists and travelers were very good about going around the world and writing about it.
Okay.
Now it's a new deal. I wanted to do a scene at the checkpoint between Jordan and Syria for some spies coming in across the Jordanian border. So I go on the computer, I do Google Images, and I get a half dozen pictures of the checkpoint. Who knows who took them? And I see, for example, they have these large concrete blocks, you know, the kind that block cars from going across.
Oh, okay, like medians or like, yeah, I know.
Yes, like
yeah,
medians,
okay,
exactly.
right.
And here in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere, they've painted Syrian flags on the concrete.
Wow, that was convenient.
Now, I wouldn't have been able to make that up. It wouldn't have occurred to me that they would bother in the desert, but I could see the pictures. So when I recreated that checkpoint in the Syrian Sunset, I used what I found on Google Images.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I guess you really could. You could pretty much, you know, and Google's made it so much easier for anything now. I mean, really, so it's got to help you as a reference anything as a writer.
It helps for a lot of things, current events, even historical stories. I did a scene very early in the novel about the rebels blowing up the Syrian military intelligence headquarters. It was a tall building. It was like similar to the way Timothy McVeigh blew up the FBI building. Right. It was trucks with fertilizer bombs. And I was able to Google and find pictures of the building right after the attack. And I was able to sit there and see the kinds of which cars were burned, what kind of supporting walls did they have around the building. In fact, the building was completely sheared away the way Oklahoma City was. And there was like a ziggurat stairwell, and medics were going up and down the stairwell with, you know, what do you call it? When they, you know, carry things.
Okay.
You know, stretchers, right.
Oh, sure.
The stretchers. Okay. So, again, I wouldn't have thought of that.
It is right there on Google Images.
But I see it right there. And somebody wrote me recently. They said they read that scene and they could smell the cordite.
Wow.
That's in the novel. So I had the help of Google, which was a great help for that.
Absolutely. Well, as far as that goes, I mean, as far as your characters themselves, I mean, are they based on anybody from personal experience? Anybody based on you, Howard?
Not so much on me, but I happen to have a friend in Jerusalem who's a kind of, who I've known for 50 years also, who's a kind of larger than life character. And he's a South African with a huge sense of humor and a booming laugh. And I based one of my main characters kind of off of him. But more, the characters are my creation, but they move through actual historical events, such as the bombing of this
the current
military intelligence headquarters
in Syria. Okay.
Right. So,
Gotcha.
and there are chemical weapons facilities.
Oops, I lost you there for a second.
Gotcha.
Oh, you got me now? Okay.
I got you. Thank you. There you are.
There are chemical weapons facilities. Syria has a huge mountain behind the city.
Right.
And they built bunkers, and that's where the secret chemical weapons installations are.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved my fictional characters through the real Syrian chemical weapons installations. So my characters aren't really based on, let's say, a real Syrian general. They're not.
Okay.
They're based on things that my main character is a Syrian general who can be a SOB and a bit brutal, but he wants to save the Syrian people. And he'll work with foreign intelligence services in the quest to save Syria.
Okay. Okay.
So that was the kind of guy I made up.
Going back, because we had some parallels earlier on saying, the things that have happened, led to possibly what, Putin's done in the Ukraine. As far as just, you and I talking here, how do you think that whole thing's being handled? Do you think we're doing the right thing, or you think we're doing enough push?
I think that we're doing the right thing, but we've been a little slow.
Okay. And explain that. What do you mean by that?
Okay. Only now, a year into the conflict, are we giving the Ukrainians tanks.
Right. Okay.
The pressure and the pull is the current administration, other administrations, they're worried that Putin will use small nuclear weapons.
Right. Exactly.
If he's pushed too far. So it's kind of like a rubber band. They're trying to confront him, pull, but they don't want the rubber band to break. So what did they decide to do just last week? Germany is going to give the Ukrainians 14 tanks.
Right.
We're going to give them 14 tanks. I think Norway is going to give them 14 tanks. Well, they need a few hundred tanks.
Mm-hmm.
But 14 is a lot better than none, or 4 times 14.
Right. Well, as far as, but somebody's got to learn how to operate these tanks.
Right. They, apparently they're pretty quick at learning. They gave them Patriot missiles. So we haven't gone in with as much aid, because they're slaughtering human beings.
No, yeah, I understand. Sure.
Putin's targeting hospitals, railroad stations, electrical stations, apartment buildings. This is a slaughter.
No, yeah, sure.
And so what I'm saying is we're doing much better in Ukraine, the West, than they did in Syria. But they haven't moved quite as fast as they could have. But I understand that because they're afraid if they give them too much weaponry too soon, Putin may get exasperated and drop some small tactical nuclear weapon.
Okay. Well, say now we're in this whole scenario is now a Howard Kaplan novel. Where does it go from here? How does it end up?
I don't know. I'm a little too much of a romantic sometimes.
Well, that's okay. You also said humor.
I'd like to see all the Russians kicked out of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to see particularly a peace negotiation, which America may force them into, because we may not have the will to continue to support them. Russia invaded, and whenever you reward an invader, it encourages other people. Mm-hmm. So he may say, so if it was a novel, I'd have
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks succeed in getting the Russians out, but maybe he'd die in the end.
Okay, you're gonna kill off Tom Hanks. That's a pretty big.
Better not. He'll never do it.
I was gonna say, I don't know. That may not fly too well with your studios that you're working with. Well, we got a few more minutes left. I want to wrap up with you plugging a little bit more about the book. You've gotten some great reviews from the ones that I've read, so I'm looking forward to giving it a look. I'm actually going to be traveling here shortly, so I will have some time to read it. Where can we get it? It's on Amazon, and
Amazon's the best place. There's a Kindle. And there is a paperback.
Kindle and a paperback. Okay.
And they're not terribly expensive.
Okay.
They're on all Amazons worldwide. Whatever Amazon there is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And they're
we'll be showing it on the screen too, but for those that aren't watching and are listening, it's called The Syrian Sunset by Howard Kaplan, and it's available on Amazon. And it looks like I said, you've gotten some great reviews. Well, what's next? You got another one you're going to follow up?
I just started thinking about it.
Okay.
The characters in the Syrian Sunset, particularly this Russian oligarch, begins kind of as a ally of Putin, but at the same time, he plays both sides. He plays loose.
Okay.
And I started thinking, people like that character so much that I could do something with him maybe getting in trouble in Russia. I've just started thinking about that. Just made a note yesterday. Mm-hmm. Basically, I've been doing some publicity and podcasts and talking to the movie people about the Syrian Sunset. Mm-hmm. But I guess I'm getting a little restless, so I'm just starting to think maybe I can do something with these same characters because they've been so well received in the reviews.
Yes, definitely. All right. So, and do you start with the character? Do you start with the situation? I mean, obviously,
it doesn't matter. It can be. Usually, I start with the situation.
Gotcha.
Like in this case, I've got the Syrian civil war. How do I want to illustrate what's happening there and what could happen? Uh-huh. And then I tend to fill it with different kinds of characters.
Gotcha. Fascinating, Howard. Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. Again, we're going to promote. We'll have the screen. We'll have the book on the screen of the cover so people can see it and know where to get it. Once again, anything final before we clock out for the day?
No, I'm happy to have the time. I'll just tell you the funny story.
Yes, please do. I like funny stories.
Okay, so next door, they've been building a fabulous architectural house for a year and a half. Mm-hmm. They've broken my sewer line twice.
Oh, wow.
Main line once, but we're on very good terms because as soon as they break something, they immediately fix it.
Uh-huh. That's nice.
So I said to them, I have to do, and they're still working, banging away. So
right.
And my office is right next to the construction.
Uh-huh.
So as I said, we're on very good terms. And I said, I need to do this podcast today.
Right.
Which can you guys, it's actually lunchtime for us. So it would have worked out well.
Okay.
While you're recording so that you don't have banging in the background. But as it turned out, we had a thunderstorm last night.
Yeah.
Torrents of rain. They're working in the backyard, which is drenched. So they're not working today until it dried out.
Oh, so you didn't need to even use this because typically.
So that was kind of, coincidental that I didn't need to disturb them. So I get to save up my points to disturb them some other time.
Well, that's wonderful because, usually, Howard, anytime somebody says they're doing a podcast with me, the world just stops. I mean, nothing happens.
Well, they were ready. They agreed. They were very happy to do it.
That's great. Well, I appreciate at least the preparation. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll call you the next time there's we'll do this again on a follow-up on your next book or see how this one's going. And I'll make sure that you're having some construction done and we'll just see how much my pull actually works.
Yes.
Otherwise, you let me know about that. Otherwise, we'll get Tom Hanks involved. Or not.
Thanks for your time. Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Howard. And thank you for watching or listening. I'm Todd Showalter, and this is Right Mind. Remember, if you don't have a right mind, you don't have a mind at all. Till next time, bye-bye.
This has been the Right Mind Podcast with Todd Showalter.